speaker is Andrew Cialini, and he too has been at all of the 5, same as me, because Andrew was appointed just before the first Building Surveyors Conference, and he's also, of course, highly engaged and responsible for today's event, so it's been great working with Andrew again. He, as you will know, he's got a background in as a structural engineer as well as a building surveyor. He came to us from South Australia, but is now calling Melbourne home for the last 5 years. And he has had, so many different hats and roles that he plays at the VBA. And of course, he is the newly appointed first statutory role of the State Building Surveyor as of the recent amendments to the Act. So welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Bronwyn. And good morning, everyone. Great to see so many faces here. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. This session we were really keen to do face-to-face, and as I said, great to see so many of you here. I hope you're really taking the opportunity to network and engage, because I think that is a really important part of our profession and our future success is talking and engaging. I'd like to also echo Anna's comments and thanks for the guests that we've had here, including the Minister. Really happy that she made the effort to be here and indicates the importance that she holds on our industry and our profession. Today I'd like to just provide you with a brief overview of our recent activities, and in keeping with our keynote speaker, look forward to our recent and look forward to some of the reform that we're working on and some of the new things that will hopefully improve our industry and our input. A key part of what the VBA does is provides oversight on the operation of the building system, and inspections of building and plumbing work is a key part of that. The inspection program continues to evolve in the VBA with the aim of focusing on and better identifying key compliance issues that then inform our other activities. And this includes education and guidance, so that is really important to provide that feedback loop, find that information from our activities and value add to the system. The program started as a high volume program and is now maturing into a more sophisticated program. Still a lot of work to do in that space, but we hope that that will add value to our activities and our time so that we're on sites with the potential to have higher risks and more compliance issues. We're piloting deep dive inspections and other forms of inspection that will hopefully provide us greater feedback on how the industry is performing. Later you'll hear from Dr. Todd Bentley, and he will be looking at our evolving risk approach to our activities. So once again, this is a strong theme for us that we need to be better at getting out to sites, identifying items that are not occurring appropriately at the right level, because we do have a big challenge ahead of us, and so it's how do we focus our limited resources and achieve the most we can. As you can see from this slide, we continue to do high numbers of inspections, so 8,200 building permits being inspected last financial year, and over 7,400 plumbing audits undertaken. The number of registered building surveyors remains relatively static, with Building Surveyors Unlimited around 589 and 238 Building Surveyors Limited for a total of 827 registrations across the classes. And that's compared to about 825 a year ago, so not much movement at all. It should be noted that this is across both natural person and company registrations, with the number of natural person building surveyors having increased marginally in the past year from 706 to 712. For me, this is concerning as the industry continues to grow, as does the registration of other practitioners' classes. This, along with the ever complexity increase that we have with our regulations and the built environment, new materials, new ways of doing things, creates a real challenge for us as a building surveying profession. And hence some of those messages that Steve provided are important for us to consider and adopt how we become more efficient right across the activities. How do we do what we do better to ensure a safe built environment? Last financial year, 17 registrations were granted in the class of Building Surveyor Unlimited and 31 registrations granted in the Limited class. So once again, not big numbers and something we need to continue to work on. The number of building inspectors increased from 965 to 1,047, an increase of 9% and more in line with what we have with other practitioner classes. It's also important to remember in these numbers that a practitioner can hold multiple registrations, so they're not necessarily unique numbers. There may be some that have multiple registrations. Our technical queries, so the service that we provide to industry in regards to technical inquiries continues to receive very large numbers of calls, over 25,000 for the year. Our website and other guidance material will be key to reducing demand on technical inquiries, which are proving challenging for us to resource with such a high volume. I'm pleased with the continued growth of our practitioner education series and proud of the work that the team's been doing in that space. The 11,000 plus attendees in the past year shows the value of our increased resourcing in this area and the development of a strong education team. We hope to continue the improvement in this area and look to industry to also continue education opportunities in key areas of evidenced need. Other highlights of note were the National Construction Code 2022 roadshows, with the intro of the new code presented in person at 15 locations across Victoria, with more than 3,000 attendees. So once again, great to see that those presentations are being well attended. With the part adoption of NCC 2022 in May this year, and the transition for energy, livable housing and condensation management adoption in May next year, we will continue to provide guidance and support and work collaboratively with industry to ensure the changes in NCC are understood and adopted in work practices. So a real challenge for us again because of the volume of it. We've got the benefit of the transition, but we still need to keep in front of that and make sure that we are across it. The VBA has the challenge of doing that right across all the practitioners so that hopefully it supports the building surveying profession in not having to do all the heavy lifting in educating practitioners on the new changes. We continue to develop our technical bulletins, and I'm keen to receive feedback on those and other things that we do. Always keen on improving and getting constructive feedback. We're also improving our practice notes with an archive system now being introduced. So any future superseded practice notes are identifiable and available for your reference. We're also notifying of changes that are made to those practice notes, so that hopefully it keeps you informed of where the changes are. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank all those building surveyors and building inspectors who responded to the VBA's expression of interest to assess the local impacts of the October floods that affected 63 municipalities across Victoria. Once again, a big challenge, a tragic natural event, but proud of the work that was done by many The assistance offered and provided by both privates and other councils was impressive and a great example of what collaboration can achieve. So in addition to the proactive inspections, the Building Surveyor Audit Program provides invaluable information on the level of documentation being provided as part of the permit documentation and also the performance of practitioners. The program, as part of the then Minister's Statement of Expectations, was targeted at building surveyors with the view of auditing the building permits of all the building surveyors over a 3-year period. To date, 219 building surveyors have been audited and 500 audits completed, with 6 reports and key findings available and published on our website. The sites audited have included 74 of the 79 councils, the program has now evolved to focus not only on building surveyors but also other practitioners, and so the designers, the architects, draftspersons, engineers and others. The program has been renamed from the Building Surveyor Audit Program to the Building Documentation Audit Program to better represent what it's looking to achieve. The broader focus is important to ensure that designers are educated on minimum documentation requirements and will better support building surveyors in the delivery of their compliance assessments. As mentioned, building surveyors should not be the sole gatekeepers of compliant buildings, with designers and builders needing to take a greater accountability in delivering compliant outcomes. The aim is to improve oversight and education for practitioners upstream and empower them to perform better. The program now also includes key administrative and code of conduct reviews to address areas of concern and will engage specialist expertise such as engineers, which will bring a greater depth and understanding to the broader documentation issues that often arise. I hope in the near future we will continue to develop the program and provide more detailed case studies and examples from both the construction and documentation reviews in the near future. In addition to these changes, the VBA established a design standards working group, which has initially included stakeholders and members from architectural and draftsperson design groups, building surveyors and the VBA. The establishment of this working group tackles a common concern of building surveyors, the role designers play in construction and the adequacy of documentation. And so it seeks to develop a practice guide to address these issues that are caused by the poor documentation. Importantly, it hopes to set out the minimum requirements for design documentation by the relevant building surveyor when assessing an application prior to a building permit. I look forward to updating you on the progress of that working group, and hopefully we'll have some draft guidance out for further comment. As Anna mentioned previously, the VBA's regulatory policy statement will identify the VBA, local councils via municipal building surveyors, and the relevant building surveyors as primary regulators of our building system. It's vital that we work together as co-regulators, and this starts with having a better definition of what our roles and functions are. This will mean we'll be able to work together for the same cause, namely safe buildings and consumer interest and confidence. What I hope this will deliver is consistency in interpretation, delivery and performance. For me, consistency is a big issue, not only between one practitioner type and another, but also within the building surveying fraternity. Reducing these inconsistencies through engagement, collaboration and education will, I believe, go a long way to improving building outcomes. We each hold a piece of the puzzle and must come together to make it whole. And I see this as one of the key challenges for the State Building Surveyor role. And that brings me to the State Building Surveyor functions that were recently introduced in the Building Legislation Amendment Bill. And just a point of correction to the official appointment of that statutory role hasn't actually occurred as yet, no. So that's yet to happen, so fingers crossed. The bill creates a number of provisions which have not yet taken effect, with the current proclamation being due in February 2024. The bill outlines the objectives of the State Building Surveyor and the functions, which include preparing the issuing of binding determinations, providing expert technical advice and guidance to building surveyors and people involved in the industry by publishing guidance materials and include technical and educative advice. It's also tasked with monitoring and reporting on the performance of the building surveying industry generally. These will create new accountabilities for the role and better define and focus the role. So I see these as good things. I see the reporting function as providing an opportunity to better understand what's working and what's not, and provide a pulse check that better informs regulatory reform and areas needing support. I believe one component of that is the building management plan, the control plan, that is proposed for councils, and heard just yesterday that VBSG is actually commissioning some work on that, so it's great to hear and keen to be a part of that. I think those initiatives will provide a structure and a framework for some of this reporting, and really keen to engage with industry broadly around what data and information would be useful and valuable. Being conscious around the flip side, the burden around the data and collection, but hoping that we, given the keynote speaker Steve's comments too, that we can use technology to assist us with that and relieve some of that burden. And finally, just in conclusion, the team that we have built is well placed to begin delivering on the functions of the SBS that have been identified in the bill. That includes the invaluable skills of our engineering and building surveying specialists and the dedicated education team that we've been building, alongside the traditional technical and regulation team of the VBA. In November, we added the role of Deputy State Building Surveyor, and it gives me great pleasure to formally introduce you to our State Deputy Building Surveyor, Jo Van Loon, over there. Many of you may already know Jo from her previous work or at functions or events that she's been attending since she commenced. I encourage you to say hello in the breaks or future events. Jo has been an enormous help, and it's amazing how aligned we are in our thinking and passion for the industry or the profession. I don't think we've had too many disagreements on interpretations and considering complex issues, so that's it gives me a lot of confidence in us working as a team. Her stakeholder engagement capabilities and team management capabilities will support the VBA's objective in working with industry and preparing advice and guidance to promote best practice. Jo's also put in enormous effort for today's conference, so thank you for that as well, Jo. That concludes my presentation, and I look forward to participating in a couple of the other sessions and hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you, Andrew. So let's talk about a few more issues. A week or so ago, there was a case from the full federal court to do with mutual recognition. Some of you may have heard about it on the grapevine, but I'm keen to get your thoughts, Anna and Andrew, on that. So it involved a building surveyor from Western Australia who was seeking mutual recognition in Victoria. The VBA refused that application on the basis that the role of the building surveyor is very different in Western Australia than it is in Victoria. So, for example, in Western Australia, they don't do inspections, they don't do occupancy permits. The role of the building surveyor is to certify drawings which are handed to council, who then issue the permits, and that is the end of it in terms of the statutory role. And so the VBA said, well, it's not an equivalent registration, and therefore you can't be recognised under mutual recognition. That went to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal and the Federal Court, and then the full Federal Court, and the decision of the full Federal Court is actually that it is an equivalent registration, and that really has quite an impact on the way that Victoria has been looking at this issue, and I'd like to get your comments on that. Andrew?
Thanks, Bronwyn. So it is a fairly recent decision, so it is something that the VBA is still considering. But it does have potential impacts, I think, for me, to the positive. So this will allow more building surveyors into our state, which is, for me, obviously a key prerogative around increasing the resourcing and the expertise we have. It's, the decision that we need to now consider is what are the risks of that, what impacts that may have on the integrity of our system. I think there's a lot of division around whether we should be positive or negative on it, regardless of the decision's been made. So I think we move forward and look at what that means and how we manage it as best we can. It's something we were thinking about with the auto mutual recognition as well. So there's mutual recognition and there's auto mutual recognition, just to make it confusing. That was where other states, and this applies not just to building, well, actually it doesn't apply to building surveying at all at the moment because there's an exemption, but it applies to all occupations, so not just in the construction industry. And it allows anyone registered in another state to undertake those activities in a separate state without registration. So that poses challenges for us around how so we don't even have registration to be able to monitor or see their activities, which is a key component of our system. We were lucky enough to get a notification piece put in for that, so that they notify that they're going to operate. But we were already thinking about, well, how do we provide greater oversight and manage the risks in this space, and part of that was auditing and inspecting in the first year of operation. So that's something I think we would adopt, probably not just for AMR but for any new entrants. So anyone coming through the traditional way within Victoria, but also those coming in via mutual recognition where they actually apply for registration in the state. And so that will be one piece that we'll look at. Other things that we're considering is guidance and education as well around the Victorian specific framework. For me, a building surveyor is a building surveyor. I've come from South Australia originally. The NCC has state variations, but pretty easy to pick up, but the document itself is national. The key component is the VIC regulations and the Act and how they're applied, and that was really the court decision was around the administrative provisions were really how we get to the end, but the occupation of a building surveyor is a person who actually assesses compliance for building regulations. And so I think for me, lots to be thought about in that space, but I think guidance and education, it's a fairly strong focus of mine, and I think that will be key to assisting any new entrants, and probably actually assist a lot of the existing as well. That we,
yep.
That consistency piece is important, and so if we give more guidance around the key framework, and we have everyone working within that, we'll get better outcomes.
Great. I don't know whether you've got any comments on that, Anna. Yeah, I think so.
I guess, look, Andrew's dealing with the implementation of this and what it means for the VBA. Our goal is to maintain integrity in the system and to make sure that the lowest common denominator is not what is driving this, and that's the big risk when you talk about any form of automatic mutual recognition. Automatic mutual recognition of all professions and occupations has been sitting at the COAG table or the Premiers Conference table for 20 or 30 years. And it wasn't until COVID that actually there was an impetus to make that decision. And the reason it took so many years was because of these very issues that you're talking about, Andrew, and the difficulty in recognising people from other states. We're all one country. We do want to have a national approach to this. Ideally, it would be fantastic if we had national standards, and hopefully we can move towards that. But in the meantime, Andrew's spot on when he says that our role is to really protect the integrity of the system at the moment and to use guidance and auditing and so on as our tools to try and make sure that the lowest common denominator doesn't apply.
Anna, I just want to ask a question about the expert panel. It's been established for 4 years and we're starting to see some of the recommendations come to life in the recent amendments, but it's fair to say there hasn't been major change yet. Can you explain to people why do these things take so long? And do you think that government actually is now finally ready to make meaningful reforms?
Look, I think ever since the cladding crisis, which probably started 8 or 9 years ago, the added impetus of the Grenfell tragedy, I think the government has been pretty focused on building reform as a whole. But look, I'm a naturally impatient person, Bronwyn, and it drives me crazy that things take so long in the bureaucracy, but that's just the way it is when you're dealing with so many different parts. And as you pointed out in your slide, the complexity of the building regulatory system is unbelievable, and that doesn't help in terms of getting reform done in a sort of speedy fashion. But the other thing, I think it's absolutely fair to say that government, these are major reforms, these are significant changes, and it is quite right that government takes the time it needs to take to consider them properly and to consult with all of you. When I was running the expert panel, we did a lot of consultation with stakeholders here in this room and with many, many others. And that consultation, and including with you too, Bronwyn, and that consultation certainly enriched and I think made much more implementable and practical our recommendations. So our recommendations are really very practically based. Now, you haven't yet seen stage 2 of the panel's reform agenda, the reform paper. I'm not sure when that will be released by government, but there's some really meaty stuff in there that's really going to help us capturing developers in the system and also talking about better consumer protection and insurance ultimately. So I can't say more than that at the moment. But look, government processes do take a while, but every now and then there's a sort of an external driver or an exogenous shock or whatever you want to call it. Porter Davis has been one that galvanised government and basically made government say, wow, what's happening here? Why are there so many fingers in the pie of this? And I think that's actually, as the Minister said, there's a review going on at the moment into the roles and responsibilities of the different regulators, and that's because the government was quite understandably a little surprised at how complex the system was post-Porter Davis. So look, there's a lot of things that we can do at the VBA within our current policies, right? But there's things that we would like to see additional powers given to us to be able to do so that we can do our job more effectively. But within our current toolkit, there's a lot we can do. We can be more effective, we can be more efficient. And so we're not sitting on our hands over at the VBA, Bronwyn, I can assure you. But we do need to make sure, and I'm sure Andrew Greer will go through this a little later today, that the policy consideration processes are done properly.
Thank you. Just on binding determinations, Andrew, this is new. I don't think any other jurisdiction has this, so it's a new responsibility, and I'm sure it's going to be a very thorough process to work out when you will make them and about what. But can you give the audience any kind of preview of the sort of topics that are being thrown around as the potential topics for inclusion in a binding determination?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Brian. And it's a question I think I got asked a couple of times in the morning break too around that very thing. So it's obviously of great interest. it's something that we're considering very strongly. So it's just nominated as a binding determination. What that actually means in practice is yet to be defined. And it could be at the high end sort of things that need a RIS, a regulatory impact statement. We don't believe that's where it sits, because that would actually mean a change in the way the regulations work. And so for us, where we sit at the moment is really looking at interpretation issues of the Act and regs, as to where it sort of ends, starts and finishes as well, whether it's just the Acts and regs, whether it's NCC, whether it's standards. So I think that's something that we will consider quite strongly with legal advice as well. It comes with lots of risks. So if we're treating in spaces that others have control over, like the National Construction Code, and we come up with an interpretation, and then at a later date ABCB comes up with a different interpretation, that creates a whole lot more headaches. So, and that's not something we want to do. For us, it is something we're stepping through very carefully. We'll involve quite a bit of collaboration with industry to understand A, what they're hoping to achieve, and B, where that sits. For me, I'm not looking at binding determinations in isolation either, so my impression would be that binding determinations came up as a recommendation out of the expert panel because of industry's desire for that clarity and understanding. And for me, that's not just binding determinations, that's the whole system, from the guidance, the practice notes, the education. So it's how we evolve that to be addressing that lack of clarity more thoroughly.
All right. We're a little bit over, but I'm going to ask one quick question for you, Anna. 6 weeks into the new job, is it what you expected? You had obviously a close look at the VBA from your previous role, but any surprises or anything people should know about the VBA from the inside that you perhaps didn't see from the out?
Well, there's secrets, Bronwyn, you know. Look, I've worked closely with the VBA over the last few years, so I haven't been hugely surprised by what I've found so far. It's made up of some stellar staff who are absolutely the best when it comes to technical expertise and knowledge. And as I said in my presentation, it's my job as the CEO to harness those skills and to make sure that we can be the most effective regulator possible. It is a very big and complex organisation. We will be looking at the regulatory policy statement that we'll be launching in the next couple of months will provide clarity to you. It's an opportunity for us to reframe what you can expect from the regulator and what we expect from you as practitioners and as industry. And I think that's a really important, it's going to be a very important milestone in the VBA. Best practice regulators have these policy statements. If you look at websites, I won't cite anyone in particular, but a lot of modern best practice regulators that we have confidence in, and that's very important, have a regulatory policy statement that says, right, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing, this is what we're focused on, these are our priorities. We are coming after people who are not going to adhere to the rules. We're watching you, and our eyes are out, and we want to make sure that we're effective. And again, it comes back to that really important question of consumer protection. So at the moment, my staff and I are very fully engaged in working on that. That will need to go through board processes, and obviously I will be sharing it with colleagues in government and the minister and so on as well. And I want to share it with your professional associations and get your input on that as well as we finalise that. It will be a very important marker, as I said, and it will require some realignment of how we organise ourselves at the VBA. So there'll be some other changes that will be consequent to that. At the same time, we've done a lot of work through the expert panel's work, and the VBA's done a lot of work on what the reform agenda needs to look like for the next 2 to 3 years. For example, additional powers for the regulator. one thing that sticks out to me like the proverbials is the fact that our maximum penalties are so low in the Act. And we all know that there are cases of builders operating and basically factoring in penalties for poor performance, into their business costs essentially. And we don't want that. We want to increase maximum penalties. There's some additional powers too that we're talking to government about getting as well. So first up, the regulatory policy statement. That will give you a very clear indication of where we're going. There'll be some organisational realignment as part of that, and then a reform program for the next 2 years that will spell out exactly how we're going to transform the VBA into the flagship regulator that we all want it to be, and recognising also your role as co-regulators, the role of councils, the roles of our other regulating colleagues such as the CAV.